as far as other books, I've read some really interesting books over the years. I used to only read Star Trek novels.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm a Star Trek nerd. I've seen all the shows and everything, and the movies, and etc. But I would read the novels, and from about 2005 till about 2015, literally all I read were Star Trek novels, and there were some really, really amazing ones in there. I got to know different authors and things like that. And
so, what is it with Star Trek? Why Star Trek?
Well, one, it was one of the first shows I ever watched back when it first went into syndication. I started watching Star Trek, the original series, when I was 6 years old, and I related to the universe. I related to the diversity of the characters, what they were doing, the whole Federation ideals and things that they were trying to accomplish. But they also did a great job of telling stories about social issues of the present day, but putting it in this futuristic setting. And that really endeared the show to me, because there were some dumb episodes like any show, but there was endearing elements and endearing characters. The characters really in Star Trek can really get under your skin or into your heart, and it's easy to follow that universe. Whether you like it, whether you don't like it. I mean, I'm a sci-fi buff in general, but there was something about Star Trek that really endeared me to the characters. I think by the time they got to, like The Wrath of Khan, where they had tied television into the movies, and, the emotional scene with Spock's death, and, just they really made some really endearing characters to go along with that universe. And I think that's why it made it easy to read the books, because it was still that universe. And sometimes it was still those characters. And every once in a while, a really, engineering type of writer will come along and create new characters, sort of like what they did in Next Generation and the other shows that came after. If you keep everything within that universe and you hold to the things that made those stories and those characters so memorable and so enjoyable, then it hooks you and you want to see more. Now the same thing is true if they don't do a good job with those, then that's not a very satisfying book. That's not a very satisfying episode if they do things that make the character out of character. But all that comes down to writing to me. Is it a good writer? Is the writer respecting the material or not? And of course that's up to everybody's individual preferences, whether they like that or not. But I found the majority of it, to be identifiable and to create kind of a lifelong enjoyment with it.
Right. I'm a Trekkie myself, but it's interesting. I've never, besides Daniel, I don't even think I've asked him that question before. What is it about Star Trek that, so it's very interesting. I know Daniel levitates towards DS9. Where are you in the Star Trek universe? Where you kind of your go-to series?
I would say I really, really enjoy the original series. I mean, just for the fact that it did so much with so little, because they had like zero budget, but they still made these, mostly believable stories and said a lot of powerful things. After that, I mean, I have great respect for Deep Space Nine, because they went into territory that had never been explored before, and they actually told a spiritual element in Star Trek beyond just one episode, and to do the whole thing with the Bajorans and their religion and everything. I thought for the most part they pulled that off very well, but just the fact that they started doing serial storytelling, and they took a lot of risks in there, which that also is in common with the original series. They took a lot of risks too. with Next Generation, it's a great show. There's a lot of great episodes, but because it was episodic and because they really didn't take as many risks, it'll always have a special place in my heart, and the characters definitely will always have a special place in my heart. But Deep Space Nine kind of took those chances, and they had, you know, a lot more of the writing elements from people like Ronald D. Moore and others that really took it into some introspective areas and basically threw characters off the deep end and said, okay, what are you going to do now? And followed up with it. And that's the thing. That's the difference to me between a so-so show and a good show is show the consequences, show how the characters deal with it, and make it make sense. Because some people can do the first part, some people can do the third part, but to pull it all off, that makes it satisfying television, that makes it satisfying entertainment, which is also true of books. Voyager tried to do that. Great characters, great premise. I'll always like it, but they did kind of strain the believability because that ship should have been in pieces by the time they got home. And they never really did that. The ship was always perfect the next week. And so, you know, you had to put aside some suspension of disbelief. And despite that, they still did a lot of character exploration. So I give them, you know, kudos for that. There's been some great stuff done in the books regarding Voyager. Enterprise, I had mixed feelings about because it started a little clunky, and then it really took off by the third season. And then by the time they got to the end of the fourth season, they were where they probably should have been at the very beginning. And so they did some great stuff, but they ended too soon. And the new Star Trek would take a long time to talk about, but there's been some really good stuff in that. And I think it's like anything, they have to take their time and work with it, and we'll see where it goes. There's a lot of good potential in there. So we'll see where that goes.
So which one are you referring to? Are you talking about Discovery? Are you talking about Picard? Are you
both?
Both. Okay, so you've watched both, obviously. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I've seen both. I've seen both seasons of Discovery. We're going in season 3, and I've seen all of season 1 of Picard. I don't want to go into a whole lot of details about that because they've got lots of intricacies, but I appreciated elements of all of them, and I think that the Discovery came a lot more into its own in its second season, and I think that Picard was extremely ambitious, and that they pulled off a lot of what they set out to do, and so they deserve kudos for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's probably the best TNG reunion that could have been imagined.
Right, absolutely, I agree. Daniel is finally piping in. He says, Alan, be careful banging on Voyager around Brian. Yeah, because Voyager is my go-to. I love all of them, don't get me wrong, but I levitate towards Voyager. I think it's
nothing wrong with the basics of Voyager. There's nothing wrong with the characters of Voyager.
I agree with what you said, though. I do agree that, it was in pristine condition, every episode. Nothing had ever happened. But no, that's the one I like Catherine Janeway, so she's my favorite.
Janeway, the Janeway, I think it was interesting, and I was really glad they came back to the Janeway-Chakotay relationship in the books.
I've only read one, so I haven't. I own a whole bunch of Star Trek books. I just have not read them. I have the time now, and maybe I should.
Interestingly enough, Kirsten Beyer, who wrote basically the relaunch of the Voyager books, is one of the main people on both. She was one of the head writers on Discovery, and she's like an executive producer on Picard.
Okay, yeah. I think I've heard of her. I'm going to have to check her out because I do need some new, well, with now that I have all these authors coming on, I have to keep reading all these books. So eventually I'll get to, my own reading and stuff like that. So do you think that reading all those years, all those Star Treks helped you?
Absolutely. It really did. Because prior to that, I think that in order for an author to become a good author, he or she needs to read a lot. I think that, and not just one author. It'd be like, as awesome as J.R.R. Tolkien is, or any fill in the blank, any author, as awesome as they are, they're not the only author out there. And every author has strengths and weaknesses, and you can learn from all of that. And so I probably read a couple of dozen authors or more over the Star Trek books, because I also like the anthologies. And so they'll throw in writers you normally wouldn't necessarily see in the main books. They'll do short stories for the anthologies. Yeah. And so for me personally, I learned a lot of things that I think I've incorporated into the sci-fi elements of my books from reading Star Trek. Now, I have made a conscious choice not to write Star Trek in my books, and I have respect for the people that do Star Trek fan fiction, such as Daniel, but I personally chose not to do that. But it has been an influence, because there's a lot of rich character development and a lot of good story progressions and twists and resolutions. And I wouldn't cite any one particular author as a be-all, end-all influence, but there's definitely a handful that I read more than others. Let's say, for instance, David Mack and Dayton Ward come to mind, but there's a lot of others. Kirsten Beyer as well. Just wrote some fantastic fiction, and I think that every author owes it to themselves to read a lot in order to grow and to do their own craft. And that's also, we do a lot of time writing, but sometimes you need to take some time off and go read. So, I tried to do that time to time, although it's extremely hard when you're trying to get books out. But I do. I think it's very important, and I think they've been a big influence.